But I think most of all I'd like to go on the record as kind of welcoming the work of the APPG in helping set the scene and really set up the hugely positive response the government issued to the dormant assets consultation. And I think particularly what's pleasing is the principles set out in the response that the fund should focus on improving social infrastructure in neighbourhoods which have got high deprivation and low social capital, empowering local people to identify needs and make decisions themselves on what's best for their community, and contributing to reducing inequality and enhancing community cohesion. I think all of those together are important, and the key characteristics of the fund that they outlined, and they were quite detailed, and it reflected in many ways the submissions that came from a number of organisations, including Local Trust and indeed the APPG, that the fund should be targeted at a hyper-local level, should focus on communities that are most in need, put resident-led decision-making at its core, provide long-term funding, have embedded capacity building work there, respect principles of additionality, so not just filling in for local government cuts, and have robust governance and evaluation built in. All things that we've heard about today are all, they're all really important things and represent a massive step forward in terms of thinking about how dormant assets could be allocated. So we're the agency that's been tasked with delivering the Big Local programme, and that's a programme that over the last just over a decade has committed over £1 million of support to each of 150 deprived neighbourhoods across the country. Many of the participants in the programme actually have come to give evidence to this APPG. It's one of the real strengths of the APPG that so many people from communities have come forward to talk about their experience. And I think when you look at the Big Local programme and how it's developed, most of the principles that the government has set out for the new Community Wealth Fund reflect broadly what we've sought to do from the programme. And we'd hope that as our work comes to an end, that they might provide some significant learning around the development of detailed delivery proposals for the Community Wealth Fund as it emerges. I think what it has shown, though, most of all, is that given time, support, trust, that local people, even in very disadvantaged areas, can achieve amazing things. And that where the starting point is very low social capital, low levels of social infrastructure, it can provide, this sort of programme can provide a tested route towards rebuilding that core of active citizens and locally run institutions that are needed to sustain civic life and provide a basis for hopefully an economic turnaround as well. And there are good examples in the programme. Again, some of them have come to this committee in Bristol. The Big Local programme has helped provide the foundation for Ambition Lawrence Weston, which is now a fantastic community-focused organisation on an Avonmouth estate that's gone from campaigning to save community assets to now partnering in the development of significant community-owned renewable energy resources for the benefit of their area. In Brinnington, what might be classed a left-wing neighbourhood, and in Stockport, we've seen the development of what's now a really significant community-based organisation, enabling everything from community gardening to community cinema, in an area where, frankly, there's you need to take a £5 a head train ride into Manchester to get any sort of entertainment, through to taking on their local community centre and turning it into a sustainable resource for the community and leading action in the face of COVID-20. Or in Bourne, in Poole in Dorset, which is not an area that necessarily we'd see as being deprived when you look at a high level. When you go down into, in so level, you can see some very, very disadvantaged area there. The local community for 5 or 6 years came together in tents on the local green space in the middle of the estate. That's where they did their community stuff because there was nowhere to meet. But having proved that there was a demand for that and reached people in the community who otherwise could never have been reached, they managed to raise £2 million to build an entirely new community facility, including a nursery for local people, and it's become, this is just one part of it, a magnificent resource for a community that before had very little. And they've just recently secured significant new funds which will guarantee the sustainability of the centre and the services that are delivered there into the long term. And I think all of those communities, what they all had in common and why they were selected for Big Local funding was because they'd been adjudged not to have received their fair share of funding in the past. And often, and this is true of all Big Local areas, that they were often places where there was limited community capacity to access those funds, whether from the lottery or other funds. The community capacity just wasn't there. And I think having at the start of there's evidence endorsed the government's proposals. There seem to be a few particular points I think are worth highlighting as really important as the Community Wealth Fund proposals are developed to ensure they have maximum impact. And I think, first of all, if the Community Wealth Fund is going to have the most effect, it needs to be non-competitive. We know from the stats, in fact, stats commissioned by this committee from Stefan, just over a year ago, that highly deprived areas with low levels of pre-existing social capital secure around 70% less grant funding. Tilly, thanks. Than other areas that are equally deprived. We saw that during COVID. In fact, this was research that was done at the height of the COVID crisis by this committee. We saw that COVID grants per 100,000 of the population were significantly lower in left behind areas than other deprived areas, and the number of mutual aid groups per head were also a fraction of those in other communities. That was revisited last year, looking at grant funding since 2003, and we find actually the picture is even worse. These are communities which have routinely failed to get funding because they simply don't have the ability to bid for it. Competitive bidding processes mean the same communities consistently miss out again and again, and these are the ones that are most in need of funding from the Community Wealth Fund. And I think part of the point of investing in rebuilding social infrastructure in those places is so they can compete better and on equal terms in the future. I think for the same reason, it's really important that in designing the Community Wealth Fund, that patient capacity building support is embedded into and runs closely alongside the planned fund, and that it's appropriately resourced. Nick has talked a little bit about workforce challenges. There are also challenges just around those who volunteer to step forward, ensuring that they have the skills to often take leadership roles in very complex and difficult communities. It's not easy. We sought to support people through light touch mentoring, through access to resources like community organisers, through our community leadership academy. It's been a core focus of our work, and I think it has to be at the heart of the design of the Community Wealth Fund from the outset. I think we realised about halfway through that we really needed to do more of this. I think it would be great if the fund sought to do that from the outset. And I think finally, resident-led decision-making needs to be at the heart of the fund. Local people need to decide how money is spent. And there's two reasons for that. The basic one is because local people know best. And because they understand their area, they understand what will have the most impact. But also because it's only by giving people the ability to make decisions, to take risks, to succeed, or indeed sometimes fail and learn, that you build the confidence and capacity that will sustain them into the future. And it's not the easy option. It's much easier to have a top-down delivery from employed officers who know what will work. But often that leads to programs or initiatives that arrive and then disappear without actually making any long-term difference to those places. Of course, sometimes people disagree, they'll fall out of the priorities, but it is by making decisions, finding common ground, taking responsibility, that people gain the skills they need to engage and partner with others. And that's something we've seen increasingly right across the programme. And it's something you've actually seen in evaluations of past programmes. I think Professor Pete Tyler from Cambridge University gave evidence to this APPG several months ago, and his evaluations back in 2015 of the New Deal for Communities programme, which I think is the 25th anniversary of the National Strategy for Neighbourhood Renewal this year, something like that. I'm trying to stretch back, but when you look at the evaluations of what came out of that initiative, it shows that in the communities where local people were put in charge of taking decisions, the impact of what happened was much more significant, and it's sustained for longer. And you can see it in places like Braunston in Leicester, which was Patricia Hewitt's old constituency. In fact, she was talking fondly about it at a recent Demos event. But they're Still Be Inspired, who are a group who, again, gave evidence to this committee, and that grew out of Braunston New Deal for Community company, led by local people, and it's still having impact now, 10 to 15 years after the programme came to an end. Because it's by grounding decisions in local communities that you ensure proper accountability and connection to local people and make a difference that lasts. I think just to summarise, we know from the work of this all-party group that deprived communities that have lost social infrastructure, social fabric, they do worse than other equally deprived places. Stefan's shown the differences in terms of education, health, mental well-being, access to the job market. Community Wealth Fund, because it's new money, significant new money, but critically money that can be stretched over time and, potentially over 10 to 15 years, provides probably a once in a lifetime opportunity to make an investment in turning these communities around. I think hugely excited about its potential to make a difference. I think it's fantastic. Not many APPGs succeed on the scale that this one has in making a case for a fund of this sort. I think the challenge now is just to make the most of it going forward.